Do you have a hard time sleeping at night because you're up thinking about Star Wars what ifs? I do. Well, introducing Manta Sleep, the sponsor of today's video. Do you ever need the perfect headwear for sleeping? Well, this is the answer. It's perfect for daytime sleeping, nighttime sleeping, naps. I love naps. Naps are the best. Manta Sleep is the perfect eye cover for sleeping, along with this very comfortable headwear that we have right here. It comes with Velcro straps so that you can easily adjust, especially if you have a fat head like me. You can also use these incredible eye covers, which also come with Velcro in case you need to adjust for your fat head like me. Aside from just the regular sleep headwear like this one, they also have a Bluetooth one, which you can use to listen to Star Wars what ifs, podcasts, rain, or music. Whatever you desire to go to sleep. Manta Sleep is incredible because of its ease of access, including the fact that it's just super comfortable. I literally cannot see anything. If I got up, I might walk into a wall. It is the perfect eye cover mask because it actually covers your eyes, and it does it comfortably. It is not painful, it doesn't hurt your head, it is very comfortable to sleep in. So use my discount code PENTYPATROL for 10% off of your Manta Sleep mask. I highly suggest this one. This one's amazing. If you want to get the Bluetooth one so you can listen to me, even better. Anyways, special thanks to Manta for sponsoring today's video. Enjoy the story.
Hello.
Our story begins in the middle of a fight ensuing on the bridge of the Invisible Hand. General Grievous's master was dead, clearly because Obi Wan and Anakin were here, alive. Count Dooku had predicted their arrival, but not his ultimate betrayal at the hands of his dear master, Sidious. The Sith Lord stood behind a chair as the two Jedi Knights quickly moved to intercept the droid general and end this war. Grievous, in the moment, was very confident in his abilities, because he had survived ordeals against Obi Wan before, and Skywalker was much younger than his reputation depicted him as. Grievous whirled his sabers around, slashing and jabbing into the two Jedi as they actively avoided the battle droids who tried to keep the Providence battleship in orbit of the planet. Anakin leapt over a droid and cut his head off, and Obi-Wan collided blades with Grievous. Instead of avoiding combat or trying to run away, the leader of the Separatist military was attempting a final stand. The Battle of Coruscant was swinging back into Republic control. The death of Dooku changed everything. But if he could kill Obi-Wan, Anakin, and the Chancellor, then this war was not lost. This was for his warrior honor, and for the honor of his late master. Obi-Wan and Grievous smashed their weapons together, as Skywalker from behind tried to interject, swinging aggressively for Grievous. The cyborg, though, ignited a third lightsaber and threw his arm back to block Anakin. Despite being surrounded on both sides, the droid general blasted his weapons at both of his opponents. Anakin was pushed backwards into the glass windows, and Obi-Wan used the Force to pull Grievous towards him before the droid general could hit the glass and send all three of them to their immediate deaths in space. The Force pull almost resulted in Obi-Wan losing his head, but he ducked, and Skywalker rushed past him, blitzing Grievous. Their sabers collided, and Anakin tried to overpower his opponent, as he did an older and weaker Dooku. Though Grievous was no mere man, he was more machine than flesh. Anakin was easily countered due to his aggressive assault. Kenobi joined behind his student, using Form 4 to aid him. Grievous was masterfully defending himself, igniting his fourth saber and twirling them at the Jedi with unbelievable speed. Anakin was too aggressive for his own good, and he jabbed into the spinning weapons, losing his saber and watching it get flung across the room. Kenobi pushed his body in front of Anakin, tanking a swing and deflecting the strikes. Grievous then realized Anakin was without his weapon, and the Chancellor was an open target. Palpatine watched the droid general turn around and charge him. Anakin, in an act of desperation, leapt over the control console and jumped across the command bridge, grabbing a saber and igniting it, defending one strike from killing the Chancellor and losing his metallic arm when Grievous's third blade ripped through his defense. The pain wasn't quite as searing as it was when Dooku took his arm years before, but Obi-Wan was able to jab Grievous in the back as a result. The warrior whipped back around, rustling in pain, and Kenobi tilted his head away, as Anakin picked his saber up and spun it around in his flesh hand and drove it through Grievous's back, leaving him to slowly wither out on the command deck room, as the ship dipped down towards the orbit of Coruscant. Like the debris that had crushed through the hundreds of buildings already, Anakin and Obi-Wan had the chance to stop more destruction from covering the planet of Coruscant from falling debris. The two of them quickly got to the controls and prepared to save themselves from the descent. With Grievous and Tyrannus dead, they just needed to assure their survival, and that, most importantly, of the Chancellor. But even though they had triumph on their minds, the Sith Lord, hidden by his disguise of a political representative of the Republic, was plotting. The death of his most important separatist leaders would surely put a dent in his efforts to maintain control in the galaxy. He needed a scheme. Even if these were his last moments, and even if they crashed and burned alive, he was focused on one reality, the one in which he became the victor. Sidious knew the importance of the coming days, and had Grievous survived, he would have had an easier time convincing the populace to turn on the Jedi Order. Obi Wan and Anakin almost made them untouchable, but almost still gave Palpatine a chance to make the Senate rally around another constitutional amendment to gift himself more executive powers. The fallout at the Battle of Coruscant was integral to his plans. Another surprise would be added to the mix when Sidious sensed the life of another within Anakin's secret spouse. Another wrinkle to his plans. This is what the Sith had lived for. 1,000 years of plotting led to this moment. He planned to rise to the occasion, as he had everything that had come before it. A strenuous return to Coruscant meant another near-death experience that he escaped, another step closer to total intergalactic domination, in the form of the impure regime that was set to rise by the end of this week. The Jedi Council held debates into the evening, following the Battle of Coruscant. The Senate in the coming day planned to vote more emergency powers into the hands of the Chancellor. Among them were the reins of the Jedi Order. The thought process from the Senate was to end the war quicker, but seeing that Obi Wan and Anakin defeated General Grievous, there were other discussions filling their chambers. With darkness covering the planet, the Jedi Council had a chance to bring the Order into a new future by making the right choices tonight. Windu was the most cautious about their planning. The Council had been growing wary of Palpatine's continuous growth within the Senate. Aside from emergency powers and constitutional amendments, he was getting the Republic to the weakest position politically as it had ever been. By appointing governors to oversee Republic systems, rather than allowing elected senators to do their job, Palpatine was creating a system of power based on loyalty. What the Jedi didn't know is that this governor program would eventually transform into the Moff and Grand Moff branch of the Imperial regime. It was in Palpatine's best interest to remove as much power from the Senate so that he could take control with as little struggle as possible. This led directly to the slowly building delegation of 2,000, which the Jedi Council wasn't aware of at the moment. Their focuses remained on the Chancellor and his next move. There became potential direction, though. Suggested by Master Coleman Kaj, he proposed that a delegation of Jedi Counselors and Knights go into Separatist territory with some trusted senators to create a peace treaty. The biggest struggle for either party inside the Senate, the Jedi Council and the Chancellor, were their limited abilities. Though, if the Jedi could instigate a divide within the Senate to pull power back into the Senate's command rather than Palpatine's, then perhaps the Jedi could gain their own political protection, while also removing their greatest challenger. It was a very fine line for everyone, and Palpatine knew it best the second Grievous died. Just as the Jedi were, the Sith Lord, the last one of his kind, once again, was up plotting. He was making calls to slay more in Mas Amedda. They needed to make sure they could grab as much control over the Senate as possible. The vote to force the Jedi Council into Palpatine's hands would come in the morning. Whether or not the Jedi would agree was a different story, but it would at the very least be recognized, if the vote passed, that Palpatine could control the Jedi like he did the Senate, the courts, the credit line and banks, military, and so forth. He was teetering on the line of absolute control, and that would be furthered in the coming hours. When the Senate eventually passed the bill to give Palpatine control over the Jedi in a deleted scene, the Order obviously rejected. The vote passed when Anakin and Yoda were speaking about visions. Other members of the Jedi Council were very betrayed, but they had enough of it. They'd grown tired of Palpatine's chicanery, and in an effort to reduce his control, they started looking for a new committee to rise from within the ranks of the Senate to challenge him. The delegation of 2,000, which came from the Loyalist Committee prior to the war starting, were trying to maintain control in the Senate. Their pathway to doing so was by reducing Palpatine's emergency powers. The folly of the delegation was their inability to recognize the moment. They were trying to take executive power away from the Chancellor before the war ended, thus making them out to look like separatist loyalists at worst and incompetent at best. This was an internal political move from people who saw what Palpatine was really doing, but they were going about it the wrong way. They, at the current moment, were maintaining as much secrecy as possible, so that they could gather systems to back their cause, hence why the Jedi weren't yet involved with them. With the new governor system taking over power once held by the Senate, Padme was brought in to visit with the delegation members to form their ranks more efficiently. She would very quickly become a vocal supporter of bringing the Jedi into their cause, but others, such as Bail Organa and Mon Mothma, would reject these early propositions. Inside the executive offices, Chancellor Palpatine was manipulating Anakin. He would immediately propose Anakin's appointment to the High Council. This was immediately following the Senate's vote to give Palpatine control over the Jedi Order. Anakin wasn't at all aware of this vote, and he remained excited and optimistic about his own ascension. This would immediately result in the Jedi Council having issue with Anakin coming into their chambers, because in this deleted scene, Palpatine gained control from a Senate vote. The Jedi and Republic had always been unified, but never had either overstepped their boundaries. The Jedi decided to play nice by allowing Anakin to join as a knight, but they had other plans for him, to ensure their loyalty and his. To politically maneuver the playing field, the Jedi were going to seize advantage of Anakin's friendship with Senator Amidala. Palpatine may have been her advisor and she may have respected him, but her honor and duty to the Republic Constitution would surpass any personal feelings on the matter. The Jedi Council at this current point, without the threat of Grievous, understood one reality. This was a race to ensure Palpatine didn't become a dictator. Another constitutional amendment and he might become one. So they needed to push the Senate to act as if their lives depended on it, because Palpatine could seize the peace times to make himself exactly what they feared him becoming. He had just positioned himself as a victim, because his life was imperiled during the battle. Now he would do everything within his power to make the war out to be his victory, his gift to the galaxy, and the Jedi likely had no place in that new galaxy. The Senate voting for Palpatine to take control over their order, in the aforementioned deleted scene, was a sign that they were ready to subsidize the order, which the Senate had been secretly trying to maneuver itself into doing for years. Even if the Chancellor wasn't a Sith Lord, he was a corrupt politician on the brink of becoming a dictator. Anakin's mission wasn't challenging, and it wasn't to spy on the Chancellor, because they could clearly see what he was doing, even after Grievous's destruction. Anakin's mission was to join Senator Amidala and report back on her position stances and potential political motivations with her allies in these trying times. She, more than almost anyone else in the Senate, was outright vocal in her terms against Palpatine. That's why they wanted Anakin to follow her around. More than anything, this mission was not a spy mission. This was a policy-based request. If the Jedi could gather allies in support of their continued autonomy, then they would have to become political rivals. The Senate and the Jedi didn't like being involved in either's affairs, but the motion made this morning had just proved the Senate was willing to interfere. So, in response, the Jedi needed to challenge this. For Skywalker, this was pretty much the best thing ever. He got to hang out with his wife all day. And even though he'd be kept from some meetings, he enjoyed all of it. She would echo a lot of stances held by the High Council, but for Anakin, because he wasn't doing something he thought to be immoral, he just happily continued being around Padme. The first day of this work would be unproductive in Anakin's mind. He didn't really learn a whole lot, because the meetings he missed out on were delegation meetings, the ones that really mattered. They didn't really want the Jedi involved because they didn't know truly how the Order would fit into all of this, mentioned in another deleted scene. They didn't want to necessarily betray the trust of the Jedi, but they were more focused on the integrity of the Republic as a system itself, not how the Jedi fit into it. Though Padme, before the end of the first day, would make a proposition, suggesting that they use the Jedi Council as a political entity to try and give the Senate more power. A big reason the delegation struggled was due to their problematic views. Many senators echoed their concerns about Palpatine's rising power, but the reason the delegation didn't get any movement was because they were still at war. They were trying to reduce Palpatine's executive power, which at the current moment portrayed them as trying to stall the peace process. The Jedi Council was secretly using contacts across the galaxy to get an audience with the Separatist leadership, who had been ordered by Sidious to cut any contact with the Republic or Jedi. Padme recognized that if the delegation wanted to get anywhere within their own government with their aspirations, then they needed to make a decision for themselves. She, after studying some of the notes Bail and Mon took on why people didn't join, realized what the problem was. A major struggle for politicians that joined the delegation weren't their policies, it was their choices. Some members, Padme included at many times, wanted perfection. Politics and policy could never be perfect, as troubling as that might sound. What the delegation was pushing was perfect policy, and they would never gain traction with the Chancellor or with the Senate by doing that. Padme discussed this lightly with Anakin at night, but essentially Padme recognized that the delegation of 2000 would never succeed in trying to strip power away from Palpatine. They would, though, find success if they made bids for power themselves. Padme, when she realized this, paced around her apartment, reciting tidbits of information to R2 because Anakin passed out on the couch while listening to her. She got the perfect resolution anyways. While Anakin would report back to the Jedi Council after another night of night terrors, he would immediately be requested to the executive building. Padme made a choice that would forever shift the position of the delegation, but it also could turn a committee of 2,000 into one of 10,000. It was all a numbers game, one that the perfect policy of the delegation hadn't accounted for. Palpatine was still etching Skywalker closer to darkness, and planned to ask him that he visit him for the opera this evening. Anakin wasn't able to join Palpatine the night before, so the Chancellor was going to a different opera performance. Instead of the galaxy-famous bubble show, he'd be going to an artistic composition. There'd be relics from centuries past and music played from across the stars, basically a gala. Palpatine would use this moment to take advantage of Skywalker. Anakin accepted the invitation early into the day, while he was shuffling between the Jedi Temple and the executive offices. The new motive of the delegation of 2000 was not to strip executive control from Palpatine, but to merely disperse senatorial influence across the broad array of influence Palpatine had. Instead of gunning for the Chancellor, they were going to make this a power play, something the corrupt senators would chase after. Padme knew that the perfect policy wasn't going to fly with anyone, so giving the Senate something tangible, like power, that they could obtain, was worth their time. She thus made the suggestion that the Jedi Council get as involved as possible, because the previous Senate vote to give Palpatine control over them forced them to be a part of the political turmoil. So basically, Anakin, after reporting on the previous night, would go to the executive building for an hour, skip a luncheon with Palpatine, return to the council, report on the delegation, receive council approval, fly back to the executive building to bridge the gap between the council and delegation, then return to the temple for his next mission. While Anakin, Padme, and Palpatine were establishing the final legs of the inner war of the Republic, the High Council had been utilizing its openness to get other work done. Without sending Obi-Wan to Utapau and diversifying their members for battles that Jedi weren't needed at, they were able to find a string of Confederacy senators, led by Arax's senator, Avi Singh, to start a peace treaty. The Jedi, having finished their mission with Anakin, and sensing conflict within him, sent him with Masters Kenobi, Yoda, and Shakti to start drafting an official peace treaty to end the Clone War. Anakin wasn't at all happy about leaving Coruscant, because it meant abandoning Padme. However, he had to comply because he couldn't tell the truth. Palpatine wasn't informed about their departure either. Anakin, without lying, told the Chancellor that he was going on another mission assigned by the Council. That was perhaps the greatest irony in all of this. Sidious put Anakin on the Council to sow distrust into his heart and his mind, but the Council continued to keep Anakin active by not having him spy on the Chancellor. Had Grievous escaped or survived, these terms may have been different, but Grievous's death was the direct cause to lead to the end of the conflict. Palpatine's term was at an end, and the Jedi, utilizing the unity of the delegation, could be the deciding factor in the end of the war. The Council recognized what Palpatine's motives were now that Grievous was dead. The mission, more than anything, was a continuation of Anakin's previous endeavor with Senator Amidala. Skywalker accepted that and began his work for the Jedi Council, joined with Yoda, Shakti, and Obi-Wan. When Sidious learned the truth about this little change, he became infuriated. While surely he would have no problem with executing Order 66, he technically couldn't. The balance for the war was in his control, but if he wanted Skywalker to join him, he couldn't execute Order 66 right now. Anakin was with Yoda, Shakti, and Obi-Wan, three of the most influential Jedi he could be around. Further than that, the Senate saw Palpatine with control over the Jedi Order, because they were playing the part, acting complicit, by sending their own representatives to the executive building. The senators not involved with the delegation of 2000 didn't realize that's why the Jedi were here, and Palpatine, despite knowing of a rising political challenger, didn't know who they were or what their policies would be. He held out hope that the likes of Mothma and Organa would hold his rivals back by utilizing perfect policy, as they had throughout the war, because it was very unfavorable, both inside the Senate and to constituents. Despite these political setbacks, which were Anakin's mysterious mission with the other Jedi counselors, Palpatine had another set of plans for messing with Skywalker's head. He knew that by doing this, he'd be at an especially vulnerable position, but he needed to try. By using alchemic rituals, Sidious would attempt to sway his future pupil from a galaxy away. He was unsure if this was fully possible, but he was optimistic. Though Palpatine wasn't really sure why the Jedi were being sent to Raxus. That was the only unknown factor. The Council wasn't especially communicative with him, and he was forced to manipulate that against them inside the Senate. On Raxus, though, with political turmoil flushing through the Senate and Jedi Order, 4 of its greatest members were utilizing an earlier proposed treaty created by Mina Bontiri and Padme Amidala. While it wasn't necessarily her role or position, Padme for the last 2 years had been picking the brains of allies and rivals within the Senate for what would be acceptable peace terms, and that's what these 4 Jedi were using. The delegation had pretty much given them the blessing to act as official Republic representatives. It was a very difficult position for all parties though. Most senators didn't know about the peace treaty on either side. These were rebels for both governments, trying their best to unify the galaxy under, at the very least, the banner of a ceasefire. That could do something. The Jedi were working their hardest for it. Thankfully for Skywalker, despite being plagued by dreams and visions, he was too busy listening to legal talk to think about them. It was mind-numbing, but it was occupying, which was far better than dwelling. Yoda and especially Obi Wan were talking the most. Avi Singh, as a sign of his faithfulness to end the conflict, informed the Jedi about the current location of the Separatist Council, which had been given to him by a super tactical droid. This would permit Anakin to relay his information back to Master Windu on Coruscant. The Jedi Council, at the same time, as the peace talks were going on at Raxus, were colluding with the delegation of 3,000. It had grown exponentially due to policy changes, and they were making themselves known to the Chancellor. Senators Organa and Amidala were speaking to Palpatine about the demands, and how they didn't want it to come to internal civil discourse. But they would push if he refused to relinquish his grip over certain subsections of the Republic. Palpatine was unwavering, and so were they. Master Windu, despite shuffling in and out of meetings with delegation representatives and future members, was able to send a task force of Jedi to deal with the Separatists on Mustafar. With Ahsoka finishing up the siege of Mandalore in the coming 24 hours, this was a very delicate time. Windu would send a very trusted Kit Fisto to Mustafar to capture the Council, which would go without problem. The only issue was the time it took to get to Mustafar and get back. That trip from the Deep Core to the Outer Rim was very long, and it would be a deciding factor in the peace terms, the end of the war, and how Palpatine manipulated power into his hands. Even though the Jedi on Raxus were transparent with the delegation, the Order on Coruscant was ordered, per Yoda's instruction, to withhold information about the Separatist Council's capture until Kit Fisto returned to Coruscant. This added unnecessary tension, but it was a way for the Jedi to maintain control over the situation. If Palpatine was indeed the Sith Lord, he would know that the Council was captured, and he might be inclined to make a move against the Jedi as a result. But instead, when his meetings for the day were over, he started to focus on Skywalker. There was a potential choice that could save everything for Palpatine. He had 2 very important choices actually. The first started with the raging nightmares. They included Padme's death in childbirth, which obviously forced Anakin to wake up. When he woke up, he'd be pestered with more visions, ranging from various types of versions of her death. And then, Palpatine would add the next most important thing, the character. Palpatine knew that he needed a physical body to join Anakin on Raxus, so with the Force, he created an apparition with physical traits. An experienced Jedi Master, like Yoda, would be able to see that this creation wasn't real, but Anakin would not. This creation, a Force projection, would be named Hego, a slight play on his former master. Palpatine, with his alchemic ritual from Coruscant, would pour every ounce of energy into this. He knew that the perfect way to turn Anakin was by forcing him to trust an individual, a wanderer who had seen the powers of the dark side, someone who could promise resolution, someone who needed to exchange a life for a life. This Hego character would confront Anakin in the street, because after his raging nightmares, he didn't want to disturb Obi Wan, Shakti, or Yoda from their rest. Anakin sat down on the residence provided by Senator Singh, and he was approached by what appeared to be a drunk. Anakin tossed the man some credits so that he'd leave him alone, but Hego had other thoughts. He stepped towards Anakin and told him he looked troubled. Skywalker was not in the mood, so he threatened the man, telling him to go back where he came from. But Hego revealed some of his nature, because Palpatine knew the truth. Hego prodded by suggesting that Anakin feared losing someone. Just like his creator, Hego spoke in a slow, methodical voice that was hypnotic to the ears and easy on tired eyes. Anakin was especially vulnerable, and Hego took a deep breath and sighed, stepping away from Skywalker and starting his gaslight, telling him that it was a shame he didn't want to talk. His wife Padme would die in the coming days. He'd be here, doing nothing good, and she would die alone, knowing her husband didn't really love her. If only Anakin truly understood the gravity of the situation. Skywalker nearly shoved his lightsaber through the man's back, but he didn't ignite the weapon to avoid drawing attention. He did, though, demand answers from this individual, and Hego turned around, promising to know pathways some might consider to be unnatural. Without having experienced the opera with Palpatine, the passage of Plagueis the Wise had not been recited to him, so Anakin was only left to listen for the first time to a man who apparently knew how to stop death. He used his knowledge of Padme's name, her pregnancy, and Anakin's visions to sway Skywalker. Hego only asked for one thing, though: a life for a life. Sidious didn't need Shaak-Ti and Obi-Wan to die as well. Surely Anakin could handle himself against those two individuals. But Yoda needed to die. That would completely stall the peace process, especially if Yoda was killed by one of his own. Over the course of the next 3 hours, Hego would continue to try and convince Anakin that all he needed to do to save his wife was to trade one soul for another. One simple choice could save her and their child. That's all he needed, a sacrifice to fix it all. Hego continued to use Yoda's age as rationale for doing it, because if Yoda had lived a full life, which he had, then what was the problem with saving his wife, who was in her 20s, and a child just days away from losing his or her mother? Anakin tried to stop the voice, but Hego continued to stand before him and promise a simple transaction. Eventually, Anakin broke and walked into Yoda's chambers, like a kid about to tell his mom he threw up. As he pulled his lightsaber off his belt, he stopped. Across the galaxy, Palpatine was sweating and heaving like a sickness had infected him. For 3.5 hours, he'd been using all of his strength, and he was just moments away from victory. Anakin was in a room adjacent to Hego, and his lightsaber sat in his hand. He looked down at the Grand Master and thumbed the ignition switch, but it didn't turn on. He couldn't. This wasn't right. Surely there were other ways. He couldn't just trust the man from the street. Anakin knew he wore his own emotions on his sleeves. Surely that man sensed that and was trying to take advantage of it. As he looked down, Anakin could feel the man's presence rise behind him, and Skywalker ignited the lightsaber. A blue glow covered Yoda's room, and the weapon hung just a few feet away from the Grand Master's body. The sound of the hum woke him up, and just as Yoda's eyes moved towards the sight of the lightsaber, it moved. Anakin swung down aggressively, but not towards Yoda, but through the apparition that disappeared when contact was made. Anakin's swing was so violent, he threw himself off of his feet, forcing Yoda to question him. But all would be revealed, not about the wife or their child, but the visions and the man who tried to corrupt him. Yoda would rise with Obi-Wan and Shaak-Ti immediately, and send a message to the temple. Sindralik would read it and relay it to the High Council. The temple defenses were raised, and an emergency meeting was forced by the Jedi with the delegation, those who were able to make it in the middle of the night. At the same time, in transit to Coruscant, were 2 separate vessels, one that'd be carrying Maul, and the other holding the entire Separatist War Council. The fate of the galaxy hinged on this. Sidious inversely collapsed due to energy exhaustion. He was projecting an entirely different entity across the galaxy for 3.5 hours. He needed time to regather his strength, and then he fell unconscious. When he woke up, the galaxy would be changed. It wouldn't even need to be more than a few hours for that change to happen. Basically stuff that would have occurred under his radar anyways, had it not been for Masameda unrelentingly trying to get into contact with him. Palpatine missed a Senate gathering of the delegation in the middle of the night, which he had no precedent over anyways. But there was a truce agreed to between the delegation members and a resistance on Raxus. Kit Fista's return in the early hours of the morning would reveal another twist of the dagger. The Jedi weren't responsible for just the death of Dooku and Grievous, or the capture of the Separatist Council, but for the end of the war and the shutdown command given to the entire droid army, which meant Sidious had only one option: create as much chaos as possible. But even that was an impossibility. He didn't learn about the treaty or the shutdown order until after he arrived inside the Senate building. The delegation called together for an emergency session. The entire building was filled with Jedi representation, and the actual peace treaty was being returned to Coruscant from Raxus, with Yoda, Obi Wan, Shakti, and Anakin. Avi Singh opened up a long-range communication with the Corps and hopes to come to an end with the conflict. The emergency session conducted by the delegation had some members rolling their eyes, but the discussion points weren't around original delegation standpoints, surprising many. Padme would reveal the new direction, and how they all wished to reduce the Chancellor's power by empowering the Senate. This would roll back the gubernatorial regulations, which added governors to Republic systems. It would include a package to pull the debt ceiling out of Palpatine's grips, so that they could finance the end of the war deals and reparations paid by the Separatists, which had been agreed to in the peace treaty. And most importantly, power of the Republic military would be split up. There were some other minor talking points, including a new commission created to maintain the function of the courts and the reconstruction of Coruscant. An under-talked about point from the battle that occurred days before was the damage done to the city. There was no official Separatist bombardment of the city, but the debris that got sucked into the atmosphere left millions homeless. Within the treaty, Dooku's estate would be used to pay off damages incurred during the Battle of Coruscant, an initial start to reparations. The session kicked off heavily with bullet points for the Senate to take notes on, as Padme masterfully used recesses in her own stand on the floor for other important notifications. These weren't actual recesses, but temporary surrenders of the floor to another trusted ally or aligned group, so that the delegation could continue to evolve their strategy. One of these recesses would be the revelation of the peace treaty from the Jedi Councilors, including Avi Singh's message to the Republic. He proposed a time of ceasefire, the instant payout of their initial reparations, and the eventual reunification listed in the delegation's proposed bills. A big way the Republic would strip power from the Chancellor's office was through reunification, which hinged on the Senate rallying around the peace treaty. Padme's ability to listen and take notes on colleagues, rivals, and constituents of herself and said colleagues aided this greatly. In reunification, the Republic would be able to spread power across the Senate more because new people would be joining them, which did mean that the former Separatist worlds would gain some semblance of representation within the Senate. However, the power play meant that the Republic wouldn't have to pay off all their damages. In this, they could reduce the power of the Chancellor's office, obtain control over their own Senate by getting rid of the amendment to add governors across the Republic, and retain their grip on power within the Senate itself. This was the largest talking point, the main focus of these bills, which the Jedi didn't really care for. They understood the political motivations and why it was utilized though. The big hit, the one that basically freed the Jedi from Senate oversight, was a shutdown command sent out to every battle droid by Master Kit Fisto. The Jedi had, with Obi-Wan, Yoda, Shakti, Anakin, Kit Fisto, and Windu, ended the entire conflict. The quick action of the Jedi Council resulted in the chance for the government to restructure itself around a time of peace. There, of course, with the announced peace treaties, the droid shutdown command, and the recesses, time for the corporations who use the battle droids against the Republic to request for chances for reconciliation. The conglomerates without their leadership, which was the Separatist Council, all of which presented by Master Fisto inside the Senate, were forced to bend at the knee and face the consequences of their war on the galaxy. Despite the entire session being led by the delegation, it quickly turned into a majority in the chambers. Palpatine tried to mediate this, and he was able to slow some things down, but his immediate loss of military power, and the ratification of the military expansion bill, was the end of his reign. He knew it at that moment, so he was forced to make this session go on for as long as possible. The legal speak of the bill hadn't been fully drafted, but the basics were covered in its signing. The Chancellor's office, having seen the triumph of the Republic, would relinquish control of the military structure itself. Having full trust in the clone army meant that the Republic could afford to allow the martial commanders to lead their own men. The subsections of this bill included Jedi oversight, Senate oversight, and leadership from two divisions in the military, the Republic Officers Commission and the Clone Trooper Leadership Council. These would later be officially established, but they were ratified here, thus removing all executive military control of the Grand Army of the Republic from the Chancellor's office. Palpatine had to suffer through this. No matter what, he couldn't break it. Even people from his own side signed vetoes for a 2/3 majority to end his own chance for a recess. To make things worse, he was suffocating on his strenuous force spell from the night before. He was weak, and he sat down through most of this, speaking ever so briefly and basically surrendering the power he had spent the last 13 years grabbing. It was a bitter end, and Sidious knew it, but with the full force of the Jedi Council present and the war officially over, there was nothing he could do. He needed to wait until the session came to an end to try anything. Though as more bills were ratified and supported by the full body of the Senate, there was a radical change that swept everyone by surprise. By the end of the day, the courts had been given back over to their own leadership, which was still kind of iffy because most of the judges were appointed by Palpatine, but a new Senate committee would change that immediately. There were also disbursements of funds initially sent by Avi Singh's treaty to prove the Separatist desire for peace after the long unending conflict. The Senate created a new branch in this session, again needing for it to be set up, but delegating control away from Palpatine in its ratification. They called it the Republic War Bank. In essence, because the delegation stopped using perfect policy, they created a system that would further greed into the Senate. It was a temporary fix, but the start of a new problem. But it ended the war, so technically it was good. The Republic War Bank in the coming decades would be used for embezzlement of Republic funds to personal senatorial projects, basically a way for them to launder money into their own pockets, a problem that a future generation would deal with. With these changes also came the Jedi representation package, and this is where things started to go wrong for Palpatine. The Jedi were inextricably connected to the Republic War Bank, because most of their funding came from the Republic. They would use the War Bank for humanitarian work after the war, so basically it was a credit line for the Jedi Order. The Senate gave the Jedi representation this, on the promise that they would help pay down the Republic War Bank, while also contributing highly to the humanitarian efforts needed after the war. It was similar to Alderaan's commitment to bringing in 40 million refugees between the beginning of the war and the months following the treaty. Regardless, the main problem was that the Senate gave the Jedi representation on a promise, but the Council, who would be represented by Yoda, Mundi, Obi-Wan, and Windu, would also make a proposition during one of the delegation's recesses. They would suggest the arrest of Chancellor Palpatine on the suspect of violating Republic law, date 3956 BBY, Section 127 of the Senate Committee appointed in that year. The bill was a Republic-stated anti-Sith proclamation, outlawing their existence. Under the legalities of the bill, if an individual that served within the Senate was found of harboring Sith artifacts or displaying any loyalty to the religion, then they would be handed over to the Jedi Order. Well, since the Jedi Order was a part of the Republic because the Senate voted on Palpatine having the ability to control them, they had official representation, which meant they could make a claim in front of the Senate without requiring a committee to oversee it, since official representatives in the 3956 bill suggested that immediate incarceration would be enacted. It should have been changed, but over the years people forgot about it. The Jedi didn't. This would be enforced by the counselors and temple guards present, as they would take Palpatine to the temple where he would meet up with Maul. Eventually, they'd be found guilty and put to sleep for their crimes against the galaxy. As the Senate put it, if Palpatine was found guilty, it was out of their hands. This would become a running motto in the Senate for the next couple years. If the Jedi found something, then they could deal with it, because it meant that the Senate didn't need to bureaucratically procrastinate over certain things. So, in a way, Jedi representation and the Republic War Bank made the Senate forget about the Jedi, basically giving them full power to act in the most productive way for Republic benefits, even though it cost them a lot of money. This Senate would be referred to in history as the Merciless Sessions, mostly for Palpatine's untimely demise, because at the time, people still valued him, but citizens had to choose between continued war or peace without Palpatine, because the Jedi had made themselves necessary for Republic success. Their oversight in the weeks following the Merciless Sessions would be necessary for stopping a push for Republic benefits in the treaty, which completely halted another chance for a war to begin, because the Republic got too greedy. Big surprise. Skywalker, on the other hand, would maintain his seat inside the Council chambers, becoming a Jedi Master, both from his success in the Peace Treaty and resisting the dark side, but also because Ahsoka saw the Jedi finally ending the war and decided to join. In a manner similar to the delegation, she stopped requiring the Jedi to act perfectly, and became especially content that they had ended the war and started using the war bank to act on humanitarian needs in the galaxy. Finally, the Jedi were able to do what they always wanted to do, but weren't able to because the Senate limited them. Anakin and Padme would have a happy and healthy experience with the pregnancy, and the senator would return to the chambers in the months following her remarkable, galaxy-renowned speech to the Senate. Oh, the will of a determined pregnant lady forced the Sith into extinction. The future Grand Inquisitor would repent for his choice to side with the Sith, and take a barash vow, with secretive oversight from a squad of Jedi, ordered to kill him if he refused to release the darkness. Grand Inquisitor would eventually return as a temple guard in the future. While the Merciless Sessions was a net positive, the war bank became an extended line of credit, used to throw money away. The Jedi and the military especially took advantage of this. Crimson Dawn fractured following Maul's death, and they became a hostile force, taking formerly separatist vessels for their own desires. The Republic waged war on them, and began campaigning to capture their territory. Eventually, it would result in the powerhouse syndicates losing out on their homes and their influence in the Outer Rim. The war bank would continue to eat funds, as the Chancellor's office just remained a spokesperson for the Republic. But eventually, those debts would be paid off, and it would become used for elongated corruption. Those would be problems for future generations of senators and Jedi representatives. The galaxy was at peace now, finally. After years of suffering, years of conflict, and years of plotting, did the Republic sew itself back into one united government for the people of the galaxy. And that, my friends, is another Star Wars C-SPAN story for you all. Special thanks to the Patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about the C-SPAN of the Star Wars. So, I recently went on a bender with Revenge of the Sith deleted scenes, and that is entirely where this video came from. I really thought that going the traditional route of acting like things would be the same if Grievous died would be really unproductive. The entire reaction of the Jedi Council kind of hinges on Grievous's death in the movie, and there's a lot of deleted scenes that kind of were the base of the story. Specifically, the Senate voting on Palpatine to have control over the Jedi Council, which is completely glossed over, and explains why the Council is super pissed off about it. All the delegation scenes where they're talking about how they want to get rid of Palpatine and remove his executive powers. This is also inspired from Reign of the Empire, which I'm reading right now. But the problem with the delegation is they were trying to take executive emergency powers away from the Chancellor while the war was still going on. This only works because of three basic things. The Separatist Council is captured, there is a peace treaty, and the war is technically at an end because Grievous, Dooku, and the Separatist Council are dealt with. That's the only reason any of this works. It is like the perfect alignment. A lot of what I wanted the Senate session at the end to be was how the delegation of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 would use power and corruption to feed the Republic itself to take power away from the Chancellor's office, not specifically from Palpatine. The framing is how it works. If they framed it as an attack on Palpatine, it wouldn't have worked. If they framed it as an attack on Palpatine's powers, it wouldn't have worked. They framed it as the Senate gaining more power, essentially stripping the Republic governors and then putting the Senate back into power. The governors were also mentioned in the deleted scenes. I'm assuming that's setting up for the Moff system, which Tarkin becomes one of. Essentially though, the main basis of the delegation is that they stop using their perfect policy because that fails them so much. They probably would have actually won the war if they didn't use perfect policy. And then of course the fact that they basically gaslight the entire Senate into being like, oh, wait a second, this makes sense. We should take our power back. Why would we give it to Palpatine when we could have power and have money? And that's kind of where the Republic War Bank comes in at too. The irony in all of this is that it's just a ploy to keep kicking the can down the road. The Republic War Bank just becomes a problem for another generation to deal with. It's the debt ceiling. They just keep raising the debt. They go to war. They let the Jedi use it for whatever. It's just their way of saying, keep kicking it down the line, someone else will deal with it. So anyways, I hope y'all enjoyed this story. There is a new playlist for you guys, the Star Wars C-SPAN playlist, I think I called it. But all the Star Wars C-SPAN videos for you all are there. Anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.